Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes.
Oh,
Today we're
wow.
diving deep into Ivan Turgenev's Fathers and Sons.
Oh, got it.
A novel that, despite being published in 1862, still has a lot to say about the world today.
Yeah,
I think so too.
you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how this book, set in 19th century Russia, manages to tap into these timeless tensions between generations, ideologies, and the very ways we choose to live our lives.
So before we get into the nitty-gritty,
Okay.
can you give us a quick rundown of the main themes
Sure.
and why this book became such a sensation back in the day?
Absolutely. At its heart,
Yeah.
Fathers and Sons is about the clash between the old and the new.
Okay.
You have the fathers,
Right.
representing traditional values and a more romanticized view of the world.
Uh-huh.
Then you have the sons, the younger generation,
Right.
who are embracing radical new ideas like nihilism,
Mhm.
essentially a rejection of all established authority and beliefs.
Right.
Turgenev throws these two worldviews into a pressure cooker
Yeah.
and explores the fallout in their relationships,
Yeah.
loves, and ultimately
Awakening.
their search for meaning in a world that seems to be changing faster than they can keep up with.
It's wild to think that these ideas were so controversial back then
Oh, yeah.
that the book sparked heated debates across Russia. It even alienated Turgenev from both sides of the political spectrum.
I know, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's a testament to Turgenev's skill as a writer.
Yeah.
He didn't shy away from presenting the complexities of both sides,
Right.
leaving readers to grapple with the questions themselves.
Right.
This nuance is one of the reasons the novel continues to resonate with readers today.
Okay, so let's jump into the story itself.
Yeah, let's do it.
The book opens with Arkady Kirsanov
Mm-hmm.
returning home to his family's estate, Marino,
Okay.
after graduating from university.
Right.
But he's not alone.
Oh.
He brings with him Bazarov, the embodiment of this new nihilistic philosophy.
Right.
What were your first impressions of these two characters?
Well, Arkady struck me as eager to impress, very much under Bazarov's influence.
Yeah.
He's clearly excited to bring these new ideas back to his family and shake things up a bit.
Right.
Bazarov, on the other hand, is
Yeah.
a force of nature.
Oh, wow.
He's intelligent, charismatic,
Uh-huh.
and utterly convinced of the rightness of his nihilistic worldview.
Okay.
He's like a bull in a china shop,
Right.
ready to dismantle everything the older generation holds dear.
And how does the older generation react to Bazarov's arrival?
With a mix of apprehension and fascination.
Really?
You have Arkady's father, Nikolai Petrovich,
Uh-huh.
who is a bit of a romantic,
Oh,
trying
wow.
to adapt to the changing times
Yeah.
while still clinging to the sentimental memories of his late wife.
Right.
He's drawn to Bazarov's energy and intellect,
Uh-huh.
but also a little intimidated by his radical ideas.
Okay. Interesting. And then there's Pavel Petrovich,
Yes.
Arkady's uncle.
Right.
And it's a completely different character.
Completely.
Yeah.
Pavel Petrovich is the epitome of the old guard.
Okay.
He's refined, elegant,
Uh-huh.
and deeply committed to the aristocratic values of the past.
Okay.
He sees Bazarov as a threat,
Right.
a disruptor of the social order he holds sacred.
Oh, yeah.
Their interactions are like a verbal duel,
Wow.
full of witty barbs and thinly veiled contempt.
The clash between Bazarov and Pavel Petrovich is so central to the novel.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It
Okay.
really highlights that generational divide
Right.
and how each side views the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Turgenev uses their interactions to explore the deeper philosophical questions at play.
Yeah.
For example, there's a scene where Bazarov famously declares,
Uh-huh.
"A good chemist is 20 times more useful than any poet."
Wow.
It perfectly encapsulates his pragmatic,
Okay.
science-driven worldview,
Right.
which is directly opposed to Pavel Petrovich's romanticized ideals.
And then we have Fenichka,
Finichka.
a young woman living with Nikolai Petrovich
Mhm.
and caring for his young child.
Okay.
Her presence adds another layer of complexity to the family dynamics.
Oh, absolutely, it does.
Yeah.
Fenichka's relationship with Nikolai Petrovich is a delicate dance between affection and social taboo.
Right.
It highlights the shifting landscape of Russian society,
Huh?
where the old rules of class and propriety are being challenged by the changing times.
And let's not forget Bazarov's infamous line when he first encounters Fenichka.
I know what line you're talking about.
This is where we act with our hands, not our heads.
Yes.
It's such a provocative statement.
It is.
And so typical of Bazarov's disdain for anything remotely sentimental.
Yeah.
But it also hints at a certain underlying tension,
Right.
as though he might not be as immune to emotion as he claims.
That's a great observation.
Yeah.
And this tension becomes even more apparent when Bazarov and Arkady visit Madame Odintsova,
Yes.
a wealthy and independent widow.
Oh, yeah.
She throws a wrench into Bazarov's carefully constructed worldview.
Madame Odintsova is such a fascinating character.
Uh-huh.
She's intelligent,
Right.
beautiful,
Right.
and completely in control of her own life.
She is.
She's like a siren,
Yeah.
drawing both men into her orbit
You got it.
and forcing them to confront their own desires and vulnerabilities.
Precisely.
Yeah.
For Arkady, she represents a sophisticated worldly ideal.
Right.
But for Bazarov,
Okay.
she's a challenge to his very core beliefs.
Right.
He's drawn to her, but he can't reconcile his feelings with his nihilistic philosophy. He tries to dismiss his attraction as mere animal instinct.
Right.
But it's clear that something deeper is at play.
And this is where the story takes a turn, right?
Right.
Bazarov's carefully constructed facade begins to crack under the weight of his unexpected emotions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
His attraction to Madame Odintsova exposes the limitations of his nihilism.
Right.
It's as if Turgenev is saying that even the most ardent rejecter of emotion can't escape the power of human connection.
Okay, so we've got this web of complex relationships brewing.
Yeah.
Arkady and Bazarov, both drawn to Madame Odintsova,
Right.
Finichka and Nikolai Petrovich, navigating their delicate situation and the ever-present tension between Bazarov and Pavel Petrovich.
Yes.
Where do we go from here?
Oh.
What are some of the key events that really drive the story forward?
Well, there's a pivotal scene
Yeah.
where Bazarov's nihilism clashes with Pavel Petrovich's traditional values
Okay.
in a very dramatic way.
Ah.
And it involves something you might not expect.
What's that?
A duel.
Wait, a duel? That sounds intense.
I know, right?
Tell me everything.
Well, it all starts with a seemingly harmless conversation about women and their role in society. Bazarov, as you might expect, takes a rather cynical view,
Yeah.
while Pavel Petrovich defends the traditional chivalrous perspective.
Right.
The tension escalates, fueled by their underlying animosity.
Wow.
And ultimately, Pavel Petrovich challenges Bazarov to a duel.
Wow. So their philosophical differences literally come to a head in a duel.
Yeah.
That's intense.
Right.
What's Bazarov's reaction to this challenge?
Well,
Is he intimidated by the prospect of a duel?
not at all.
Right.
In fact, he's almost amused by the whole situation.
Wow.
He sees the duel as a ridiculous display of outdated aristocratic pride.
Okay.
He even jokes in Latin while preparing for the duel.
Oh, wow.
It's almost as though he's deliberately mocking Pavel Petrovich's formality and seriousness.
It sounds like a clash of personalities as much as ideologies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But despite Bazarov's nonchalant facade,
Uh-huh.
the duel proves to be a turning point in the novel.
How so? Does someone get hurt?
Yes, Pavel Petrovich is wounded, though not fatally.
Okay.
And for Bazarov, the duel is a moment of reckoning.
Oh.
It forces him to confront the potential consequences of his nihilism,
Right.
its capacity for violence and disruption.
Uh,
It's a stark reminder that even though he rejects traditional values, he's not immune to their power.
that makes sense.
Right.
Even if you don't believe in something,
Right.
it can still have an impact on you.
Exactly.
So what happens after the duel?
Well,
How does this experience change Bazarov?
he becomes more introspective,
Okay.
less certain of his own convictions.
Uh-huh.
He decides to leave the Kirsanov estate and returns to his family's home.
Okay.
It's almost as if he's seeking refuge in the familiar,
Yeah.
trying to ground himself after the emotional turmoil of the duel and his
Ugh.
confusing feelings for Madame Odintsova.
It sounds like he's starting to question his nihilistic worldview.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He throws himself into his work,
Okay.
treating peasants and applying his scientific knowledge to practical problems.
Right.
But even in these acts of service,
Yeah.
there's a growing sense of disillusionment.
Really?
His nihilism, which once seemed so liberating,
Hmm.
now feels inadequate in the face of human suffering and the complexities of life.
So his attempts to escape his feelings by focusing on work don't seem to be working.
No.
What happens next? Does he stay on his family's estate?
He does for a while.
Okay.
But a series of events, including a brief and awkward reunion with Madame Odintsova,
Ooh.
further contribute to his growing sense of unease.
Okay.
Ultimately, a chance encounter leads to a devastating twist of fate.
Okay, this is where I'm getting nervous.
Tell
Tell me, what's this devastating twist?
While treating a peasant who has died from typhus, Bazarov accidentally cuts himself during the autopsy and contracts the disease himself.
Oh, no. The ultimate irony.
Right.
The man of science struck down by a disease he can't control.
Precisely.
Oh, wow.
And this encounter with his own mortality forces Bazarov to confront the limitations of his beliefs.
Yeah.
Nihilism, with its rejection of everything except the material world,
Right.
offers little comfort in the face of death.
So how does Bazarov handle this?
Well,
Is he still clinging to his nihilistic views, or is this illness forcing him to reevaluate everything?
he initially tries to maintain his composure,
Okay.
but as the disease progresses,
Yeah.
his facade crumbles. He experiences moments of fear, regret,
Oh, wow.
and even a longing for connection.
This must be a really difficult time for him,
It is.
especially for someone who has always prided himself on his rationality and control.
Exactly.
What happens next? Does he reach out to anyone?
He does. In a poignant act of vulnerability,
Okay.
he sends for Madame Odensova.
That's so interesting. Why her? Does he confess his love for her?
Yes. In their final meeting, he confesses his love for her.
Wow.
A love he can no longer deny or suppress.
Oh.
It's a heartbreaking scene filled with regret and unspoken longing.
It sounds like their roles have reversed.
Yes.
Now it's Bazarov who is experiencing those overwhelming emotions he always dismissed,
Right.
while Madame Odensova, known for her composure, is confronted with his raw vulnerability.
Exactly.
Right.
She's deeply moved by his confession, but ultimately unable to fully reciprocate his feelings. She cares for him in his final days,
Okay.
but their connection remains tragically incomplete.
This is such a powerful scene.
Yeah.
I remember that passage in the book where Bazarov reflects on life and death.
Yes.
He says, "Of all things in this world, long life is the most desirable. Yet you can see for yourself what an ugly spectacle I, a half-crushed but still wriggling worm, am now become."
Yes.
It's so haunting. Such a stark contrast to his earlier confidence and swagger.
It's one of the most powerful passages in the novel.
Yeah.
It reveals the tragedy of Bazarov's character, his brilliance, his potential, ultimately cut short by his own rigid beliefs.
Oh.
He dies a conflicted man,
Yeah.
having challenged the old order,
Yeah.
but ultimately unable to offer a viable alternative.
So Bazarov dies,
He does.
but the story doesn't end there.
No, it doesn't.
What happens to the other characters? Do they find happiness after all this upheaval?
Well, their paths are certainly varied. Let's start with Pavel Petrovich. Despite his initial disdain for Bazarov, he undergoes a surprising transformation.
Oh, really?
He ends up marrying Fenichka,
Wow.
legitimizing their relationship and embracing a life far different from the aristocratic path he once envisioned.
It's a pretty unexpected turn of events. It seems like Bazarov, even in death, has had a lasting impact on those around him.
Indeed. And then there's Arkady. He marries Katya, Madame Odensova's younger sister.
Okay.
Their relationship represents a kind of compromise, a blending of tradition and progress. They seem to embody a hope for the future.
Yeah.
A future where the old and the new can coexist peacefully.
And what about Madame Odensova? Does she find happiness?
She eventually marries, but not for love. It's a marriage of convenience,
Oh, wow.
suggesting that she's still unable or unwilling to embrace true emotional connection.
Okay.
She remains an enigma, perhaps forever marked by her encounter with Bazarov and the glimpse of passion he awakened in her.
So looking at the ending of Fathers and Sons, would you say it's optimistic? Is Turgenev suggesting that a harmonious blending of generations and ideologies is possible? Or is there a sense of underlying tragedy, a feeling that something has been lost in the process of progress?
That's a great question, and I think it's one that each reader has to answer for themselves.
Yeah.
The ending is certainly open to interpretation. On the one hand, you have the hopeful image of Arkady and Katya building a life together, embracing the future with a sense of optimism. But then you have the lingering shadow of Bazarov's death, a reminder of the cost of radical change and the enduring power of the past.
It's interesting to consider how these themes continue to resonate today. We're still grappling with the tension between tradition and innovation, the clash between generations, and the search for meaning in a rapidly changing world.
Absolutely. And I think that's why Fathers and Sons remains such a compelling and relevant work of literature. It doesn't offer easy answers, but it forces us to engage with these timeless questions. It challenges us to consider our own values, our relationships with the past, and our hopes for the future.
This has been a fascinating deep dive. Before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts or questions for our listeners to ponder as they reflect on Fathers and Sons?
Well, I think one of the most intriguing aspects of the novel is the complex character of Bazarov.
Okay.
He's a fascinating mix of contradictions, brilliant and arrogant, cynical and passionate, destructive, and ultimately quite tragic.
Yeah.
So I'd ask our listeners to consider this. Did Bazarov, despite his rejection of romanticism, ultimately succumb to its allure? Was his death a defeat or a kind of twisted victory? And how might his journey inform our own understanding of the complex interplay between reason, emotion, and the search for meaning in our lives?
What amazing questions to leave our listeners with, Fathers and Sons, is a book that stays with you long after you finish reading it. It provokes debate, challenges, assumptions, and ultimately leaves you with more questions than answers. And that's the mark of a truly great novel.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Fathers and Sons. We hope you've enjoyed exploring the depths of this timeless classic.